A narcissist's sense of control is the scaffolding that holds up their entire world. Their relationships, their work, even the narratives they tell themselves, all rely on maintaining a position of dominance over others. They craft a reality in which they are central, indispensable, and untouchable. This control is rarely about power for its own sake. It is a survival mechanism, a shield against the unbearable anxiety of being seen as ordinary, flawed, or inadequate. And so, when a woman enters their life, who refuses to be confined by expectations, who makes choices independently, who trusts her own judgment, the narcissist experiences a kind of existential threat. Her independence does not simply frustrate them, it exposes the mechanisms they rely upon to feel whole. To understand why this is so threatening, we need to look at the subtle architecture of narcissistic control. It is not always overt. Often, it is woven into the ordinary everyday interactions, a comment here, a dismissal there, a micro-manipulation designed to sow doubt. The narcissist is adept at cultivating reliance, conditioning others to defer, to seek approval, to second-guess their own instincts. They feed off the energy of those who give them validation, who adjust their behavior to avoid conflict, and who internalize blame in a way that keeps the narcissist's self-image unchallenged. But an independent woman does not play this game in the usual way. She has her own compass. She does not rely on his approval to validate her worth, and this refusal to comply with the unspoken rules of his control is terrifying to him. The fear arises not from her capabilities, but from what she reveals about him. Her autonomy shines a light on the illusion he has so carefully constructed. In her presence, he is no longer the omnipotent figure he portrays. He is vulnerable, exposed, dependent on a performance to maintain his image. He cannot manipulate her in the same way he does others. Every decision she makes for herself, every boundary she asserts, every act of self-determination punctures the narrative he relies on. She is a mirror, not of what he wants her to be, but of what he cannot be, genuinely self-reliant, unshaken by his attempts at control and fully present in her own reality. This exposure often triggers a spectrum of defensive behaviors. A narcissist may attempt to undermine her confidence, belittle her achievements, or question her decisions, not out of rationality, but out of panic. He senses that the stability he has artificially created is at risk. When the scaffolding of his control trembles, anxiety floods in, and he may lash out, retreat, or escalate his manipulations in a desperate bid to reassert dominance. The independent woman's strength is not a provocation. It is a mirror that reflects the fragility he has worked so hard to conceal. What is particularly striking is how this dynamic mirrors deeper psychological patterns. Many narcissists experienced environments in which they had to perform, charm, or dominate to feel safe or valued. Their fear of independent women is therefore both a reaction to current circumstances and an echo of old insecurities. The very traits that make her powerful, her decisiveness, her self-possession, her ability to trust herself, are traits he never fully developed, never felt permitted to embody, and now fears because they remind him of his own unmet needs. Yet the independent woman need not feel responsible for his reaction. Her autonomy is not an attack, it is a manifestation of her humanity. Her ability to stand in her own truth, to act without fear of judgment, to live according to her own values, is a quiet but profound act of resistance. It is also, paradoxically, a source of liberation for him, though he cannot recognize it in the moment. By refusing to bend to his control, she demonstrates that life can exist outside of his influence, that validation does not need to flow through him, and that intimacy does not require surrendering one's self. Her independence is not a threat to her, but to the illusion he has built around himself. For those who have encountered this dynamic, the lesson is both subtle and powerful. Recognize that the narcissist's fear of independent women says far more about him than it does about you. It reflects the fragility of a self constructed on the need for control, rather than the security of authenticity. Every act of autonomy you claim is a testament to your resilience and a reclamation of your life. You are not overreacting when you feel their tension. You are simply witnessing the truth of your power. Ultimately, the presence of an independent woman forces the narcissist to confront a reality he has long avoided. He sees the limits of his influence, the hollowness of his authority, and the impossibility of controlling someone who refuses to be confined. And in this confrontation, there is clarity, strength, authenticity, and self-possession cannot be subdued by fear or manipulation. Your independence is not just your right, it is your shield, your compass, and your liberation. You do not need to prove anything to him. You only need to remain whole, fully present, and unyielding in your truth. That is where your power lies, and it is the very thing he fears most. A narcissist's fragile sense of self is intricately tied to the way others perceive them. They construct an identity that relies heavily on admiration, deference, and the affirmation of their superiority. It is not simply a desire for attention, it is a psychological necessity. Every compliment, every acknowledgement, every hint of validation becomes a scaffolding supporting the precarious structure of their ego. And in this delicate architecture, confidence in another, a self-assured, independent woman, becomes a destabilizing force. She does not offer the validation they crave, nor does she bend to maintain the illusion of their grandeur. Her confidence is a mirror, reflecting not her own strengths alone, but the insecurity, emptiness, and inadequacy that the narcissist has worked so tirelessly to conceal. When a narcissist encounters a woman who is confident, who is unshaken in her convictions, who asserts her own worth unapologetically, it can trigger an intense sense of threat. Her self-assuredness challenges their need for control and undermines the narrative that places them at the center of significance. She is not easily impressed or intimidated, and she does not require their permission to feel valuable. To the narcissist, this is bewildering, even alarming. They are accustomed to environments where others' self-doubt and compliance shore up their sense of power. Confidence in another, especially one who refuses to be diminished, disrupts the dynamics they depend on to maintain their fragile equilibrium. This fear is deeply rooted in the narcissist's own unresolved vulnerabilities. Many narcissists carry histories of emotional neglect, inconsistent caregiving, or conditional acceptance. Their confidence, when seen in another, serves as a stark reminder of what they were denied, a sense of inner security, self-worth, and the freedom to assert themselves authentically. In other words, it is not the woman's strength that incites fear, it is the reflection of their own deficits that her confidence exposes. Each moment in which she stands firm, unafraid to express her desires or uphold her boundaries, is a subtle confrontation with a part of themselves they have long avoided facing. Moreover, confident women are harder to manipulate. A narcissist thrives on creating environments of doubt, confusion, and dependency. They use subtle tactics, gaslighting, triangulation, emotional withholding, to maintain control. But confidence acts as a shield against these tactics. When a woman trusts her perception, believes in her judgment, and remains grounded in her values, it undermines the narcissist's ability to orchestrate reality to their advantage. They feel powerless because their usual tools, fear, uncertainty, and the withholding of validation, no longer carry the same weight. Her confidence disrupts the rhythm of their control, leaving them scrambling to regain dominance, often with frustration, anger, or desperate charm. It is important to understand that this reaction is not about the woman's behavior. Confidence is not aggression, it is presence. It is a natural state of being that radiates from an integrated sense of self. Yet to a narcissist, whose identity is performative and dependent on external affirmation, such self-possession is profoundly threatening. Her composure, decisiveness, and self-respect reveal the limitations of his constructed identity. Every moment she acts from an internal compass, free from the need for his approval, exposes the emptiness behind his performative persona. He experiences this not just as frustration, but as a subtle humiliation, an awareness that the power he has assumed over others does not extend to her. The broader lesson here is that confidence is not a tool to provoke a narcissist. It is a form of self-preservation. By trusting oneself, setting boundaries, and maintaining integrity, a woman asserts a form of power that cannot be stolen, diminished, or manipulated. The narcissist may respond with anger, subtle sabotage, or attempts to regain authority, but these reactions reveal more about his insecurity than about her worth. Confidence illuminates a truth the narcissist cannot tolerate. They are not the center of someone else's universe. and their power is ultimately limited by the autonomy of those around them. In witnessing this dynamic, one must recognize the transformative potential of self-assurance. Confidence is not merely a personal achievement, it is a protective framework that preserves emotional health, fosters autonomy, and exposes manipulation for what it is. The independent, confident woman does not need to defeat the narcissist to claim her power. Her presence alone, grounded in clarity and self-trust, is enough to disarm the mechanisms of control that rely on others' insecurity. Ultimately, the narcissist's fear of a confident woman reveals the truth of her power. It is steady, inherent, and impervious to external validation. It is not a challenge issued to him. It is a declaration of her own sovereignty, and in that sovereignty lies a freedom he can never truly command. Her confidence does not provoke fear, it illuminates it, and in that illumination she stands unshaken, unbound, and fully herself. A narcissist thrives on emotional leverage. Their influence over others is often built on creating a sense of uncertainty, dependency, or self-doubt. They are skilled at identifying vulnerabilities and exploiting them, whether through subtle manipulations, gaslighting, or the strategic withholding of affection and validation. In this context, emotional resilience becomes not just a strength, but a threat. An independent woman who has cultivated emotional stability and resilience is in many ways impervious to the manipulative currents a narcissist wields. Her capacity to maintain composure, self-awareness, and groundedness undermines the very mechanisms he relies on to assert dominance. Emotional resilience, at its core, is the ability to experience emotions fully without being overwhelmed by them, to process setbacks without internalizing blame, and to respond rather than react impulsively. For a narcissist, this is profoundly unsettling. They operate in a world where emotional turbulence is a tool, a lever for control. When their attempts to provoke anxiety, guilt, or insecurity fail, they are confronted with a paradox. The very energy they depend on to feel powerful is unavailable to them. The independent woman's resilience acts like a mirror, reflecting both her inner strength and the emptiness of the narcissist's reliance on external validation. She is not detached or indifferent, she is present, aware, and unshakable. This resilience exposes the fragility behind the narcissist's performance. Many narcissists construct an elaborate facade of confidence, competence, and invulnerability, but this is often a thin veneer covering deep-seated insecurity. They have learned to navigate the world by projecting certainty while manipulating others to fill the gaps in their self-esteem. When faced with someone who is emotionally self-sufficient, someone who does not provide easy access to validation or emotional reaction, the narcissist experiences disorientation and fear. The independent woman's resilience denies him the familiar cues that guide his manipulations, forcing him to confront a reality in which his usual tactics are ineffective. Emotional resilience also empowers the independent woman to maintain boundaries without guilt. Narcissists often attempt to blur the lines between their needs and others, creating confusion and a sense of obligation. They may attempt to provoke empathy, guilt, or fear as tools of control. But when a woman has cultivated emotional resilience, she is capable of distinguishing her own needs and feelings from those imposed upon her by another. She can say no, disengage from drama, and prioritize her well-being without succumbing to manipulation. This clarity not only protects her but also diminishes the narcissist's sense of control, leaving him frustrated and increasingly desperate. Furthermore, resilience fosters a sense of internal authority that cannot be undermined. While narcissists require external affirmation to stabilize their sense of self, an emotionally resilient woman draws strength from her own values, experiences, and understanding. She does not depend on approval to feel whole. This self-sufficiency is destabilizing because it removes the emotional fuel the narcissist counts on. Her reactions are measured, deliberate, and grounded, and she cannot be coerced into providing validation, reassurance, or compliance on demand. To a narcissist whose world is structured around the manipulation of others' emotions, this is profoundly threatening. It is important to note that emotional resilience does not imply invulnerability or a lack of sensitivity. On the contrary, it requires courage, self-awareness, and a willingness to confront one's own vulnerabilities. The independent woman who embodies resilience has likely faced challenges, endured setbacks, and learned to navigate emotional turbulence with grace. She understands that her value is not contingent upon the approval of another, and that her identity is not negotiable. This stability creates a boundary that narcissists cannot easily penetrate, highlighting the stark contrast between a life lived authentically and one sustained by manipulation and control. In essence, emotional resilience disrupts the narcissist's world. It disarms manipulation, protects autonomy, and illuminates the limitations of control built on fear and dependency. The independent woman's ability to remain centered, assert her boundaries, and navigate life without surrendering her emotional authority demonstrates a form of power that cannot be diminished by intimidation or deceit. Ultimately, her resilience is both a shield and a declaration. She is grounded in herself, impervious to coercion, and fully capable of maintaining her emotional sovereignty. The narcissist may attempt to provoke, to unsettle, or to regain influence, but he encounters a reality he cannot manipulate, a woman whose inner strength is self-sustaining, unwavering, and profoundly freeing. Her resilience is not just a defense, it is a statement. She cannot be owned, controlled, or diminished. And in that realization, the narcissist encounters the one force he cannot master, her unwavering self-possession. One of the most unsettling realities for a narcissist is witnessing autonomy in someone they hope to control. Autonomy in this context is not simply independence in action, it is the unwavering capacity to make decisions, assert one's values, and live according to one's own principles without seeking approval or validation. For a narcissist whose sense of self is built upon influence over others and the cultivation of dependency, autonomy represents a profound threat. It is a force they cannot bend, manipulate, or commandeer. When an independent woman exercises autonomy, she demonstrates a form of self-possession that cannot be undermined by charm, intimidation, or subtle coercion. Autonomy creates a mirror in which the narcissist sees the limitations of their influence. Many narcissists rely on creating environments where others' choices are dictated, constrained, or shaped by fear, guilt, or obligation. They thrive in situations where their desires are imposed and where deviation from their expectations is minimized. But autonomy defies this framework. The woman who lives by her own compass refuses to be ensnared in scripts written by someone else. She makes decisions aligned with her values, prioritizes her well-being, and does not seek permission to assert her needs. Each act of self-determination exposes the gaps in the narcissist's control, revealing the fragility beneath their carefully constructed dominance. To understand why autonomy triggers fear, we must examine the narcissist's core vulnerabilities. Narcissistic behavior often emerges from unresolved emotional wounds, early experiences of neglect, invalidation, or conditional acceptance. Their sense of worth is frequently tied to external validation, and their identity is performative, constructed to elicit admiration or compliance. Autonomy in another person, particularly a woman, is a constant reminder that their identity is not universally compelling, that their influence has boundaries, and that others are capable of existing fully and powerfully without them. This realization can provoke anxiety, insecurity, and a subtle, often unconscious sense of threat. Autonomy also disrupts manipulation. Narcissists frequently employ strategies, such as guilt-tripping, gaslighting, or emotional withholding, to shape others' behavior. A woman with true autonomy resists these tactics because her decisions are grounded in self-awareness rather than external pressure. She evaluates situations based on her judgment, maintains her boundaries, and does not allow her actions to be dictated by fear of reprisal or desire for approval. Her autonomy shields her from being coerced into providing the emotional fuel the narcissist relies on. Every time she chooses for herself, she diminishes the effectiveness of his manipulative tools. This autonomy is inherently empowering not only for the woman but as a reflection of what the narcissist cannot possess. Many narcissists fear power that exists independently of them, precisely because it cannot be subjugated or harnessed. The independent woman's capacity to act according to her values demonstrates that real strength is rooted internally, not in the ability to bend others to one's will. This contrasts sharply with the narcissist's approach, which equates influence over others with personal significance. Her autonomy is a living testament to self-sufficiency, a state of being that they cannot command, and that exposes the dependence upon which their identity rests. It is important to clarify that autonomy does not imply isolation or disconnection. Rather, it represents a grounded, self-aware engagement with life, an ability to navigate relationships, responsibilities, and challenges without sacrificing selfhood. The woman who embodies autonomy interacts with the world intentionally, chooses freely, and maintains her integrity in thought, word, and deed. She is neither reactive nor defensive. She is deliberate and present. Her choices reflect a deep understanding of herself and a refusal to live according to the whims of another's ego. For the narcissist, this realization is destabilizing. They may attempt to reassert control through manipulation, intimidation, or seductive behaviors, but the autonomous individual remains unmoved. Each act of self-determination highlights the limitations of the narcissist's influence and reinforces the reality that true power cannot be acquired through coercion or fear. Autonomy, in its essence, is freedom, a freedom that the narcissist cannot infringe upon. Ultimately, autonomy is both shield and declaration. It affirms the woman's right to selfhood, preserves her integrity, and establishes a domain in which she is untouchable. The narcissist may react with discomfort, frustration, or even attempts at control. But these reactions are markers of the power she holds. She does not need to prove herself or to fight. Her very capacity to choose freely and act intentionally is enough to assert her sovereignty. Her autonomy is a quiet, undeniable force. It is a presence that cannot be owned, a power that cannot be diminished, and a freedom that cannot be constrained. And in that freedom she stands fully herself, resilient, unshakable, and profoundly untouchable. Another reason a narcissist fears independent women is the clarity with which these women understand their own worth. Narcissists thrive in environments where ambiguity, self-doubt, and insecurity can be exploited. They rely on the ability to manipulate others' perceptions, create dependence, and subtly or overtly control the narrative of self-value. An independent woman, however, possesses an intrinsic awareness of her own value, a deep-seated sense that she is complete, capable, and worthy, regardless of external approval. This self-knowledge is profoundly threatening to a narcissist because it erodes the foundations upon which their influence is built. When a woman knows her worth, she is no longer susceptible to the tactics that narcissists have perfected over time. Praise, criticism, affection, or withdrawal are tools the narcissist uses to destabilize and direct others, but self-assuredness renders these tools largely ineffective. The independent woman recognizes manipulation when it appears, and she does not internalize it as a reflection of her own inadequacy. Her sense of worth is self-generated, not dependent on whether someone else approves, admires, or fears her. This autonomy of value removes the narcissist's ability to use emotional leverage, leaving them frustrated and disoriented. The narcissist's discomfort is also psychological. Much of their identity relies on the belief that others need them, admire them, or exist in some form of dependency. When an independent woman demonstrates that she knows her worth and lives according to her own standards, it directly contradicts the narrative the narcissist depends on. The realization that someone can thrive, assert themselves, and remain emotionally whole without their intervention triggers anxiety, defensiveness, and often covert attempts to regain control. The narcissist fears being rendered irrelevant, exposed, and powerless in the presence of self-assuredness. Understanding one's worth also fosters boundaries, and boundaries are another source of fear for narcissists. A woman who values herself will not tolerate behaviors that compromise her integrity, safety, or emotional health. She can identify manipulation, refuse to participate in toxic dynamics, and disengage without guilt. For the narcissist, who relies on blurring boundaries and creating confusion, this clarity is threatening. Each time the independent woman asserts what is acceptable and what is not, she denies the narcissist the control they crave. Her self-worth becomes a protective force, a shield that prevents coercion, intimidation, and emotional exploitation. Moreover, self-awareness of worth allows an independent woman to make choices aligned with her values rather than the whims of others. Narcissists fear this, Because their power is dependent on predictability and compliance, they are unsettled when their usual tactics fail to manipulate outcomes. An independent woman acts intentionally, guided by internal principles rather than external pressure, which renders traditional manipulative strategies, guilt, charm, silent treatment, ineffective. Her consistent alignment with her values demonstrates that her life cannot be dictated, and her fulfillment does not depend on validation from others, including the narcissist. It is also important to recognize that self-worth is not arrogance or dismissiveness. Independent women with a strong sense of value are grounded, self-reflective, and compassionate. They understand their limitations and acknowledge their vulnerabilities, yet they do not permit others to exploit them. This balance of confidence and humility, self-respect and empathy, creates an aura of stability and self-possession that narcissists cannot penetrate. It highlights the contrast between authentic strength and the performative power of narcissistic control. Ultimately, the independent woman's recognition of her worth is a quiet, unyielding power. She does not need to fight, prove herself, or demand recognition. Her presence, her choices, and her internal compass demonstrate a completeness that the narcissist cannot alter. The more she embodies self-respect, the more the narcissist feels destabilized, powerless, and threatened. Her worth is a boundary, a declaration, and a form of freedom, all at once. In the face of someone who understands and honors her value, the narcissist is confronted with a reality they cannot control. A person who is whole, centered, and unwavering in self-regard. This realization challenges the very framework of their existence and forces them to reckon with the limits of their influence. Her worth is her power. It cannot be borrowed, stolen, or diminished. And in that unwavering recognition of herself, she becomes untouchable, unassailable, and free. Finally, a key reason narcissists fear independent women is their refusal to tolerate disrespect and manipulation. Narcissists thrive in environments where their targets allow repeated violations of boundaries, where emotional exploitation is normalized, and where accountability is absent. They rely on the passive compliance of others to maintain their sense of superiority. But the independent woman does not tolerate such behaviors. Her strength lies in her refusal to accept devaluation, dismissiveness, or coercion, and this refusal fundamentally threatens the narcissist's sense of control. This intolerance is not about confrontation for the sake of conflict, rather, it is grounded in self-respect and discernment. An independent woman recognizes what is harmful, what is manipulative, and what undermines her integrity. She does not ignore or excuse toxic behaviors simply to preserve harmony or placate another person's ego. Narcissists, whose interactions are often calculated to extract compliance or emotional energy, encounter a paradox when faced with someone who refuses to comply. Their usual strategies, gaslighting, guilt, blame, and charm, become ineffective. The independent woman's boundaries are firm, articulated, and unwavering, leaving the narcissist unable to predict, manipulate, or bend her to their will. For the narcissist, this refusal represents a profound challenge. It exposes the limitations of their influence and the fragility of their authority. They are accustomed to environments where rules bend according to their desires and where consequences are minimized by the acquiescence of others. When confronted with resistance rooted in integrity and self-respect, they experience a form of powerlessness that is both threatening and disorienting. They fear exposure, the realization that they cannot dominate, intimidate, or control, no matter how much effort they invest. Refusing to tolerate manipulation also forces narcissists to confront themselves in a way they often avoid. Independent women, by asserting boundaries and rejecting disrespect, reveal the moral and ethical consequences of the narcissist's behavior. They reflect back to the narcissist the dissonance between how the world should function based on fairness, respect, and mutual accountability, and the distorted framework that narcissism relies upon. This confrontation is unsettling because narcissists construct reality around their needs and desires. When someone refuses to participate in that distortion, it threatens the coherence of their constructed self-image. Moreover, an independent woman's intolerance of mistreatment communicates that her life, her emotions, and her choices are non-negotiable. She does not require approval to assert her standards, nor does she seek validation for her decisions. This autonomy is deeply destabilizing for a narcissist because it negates the mechanisms through which they derive emotional power. Each refusal to accept disrespect diminishes the narcissist's leverage and amplifies their insecurity. The more she holds her ground, the more they realize that control is an illusion and that influence over others is neither inherent nor guaranteed. It is essential to understand that this strength is not born from aggression or hostility. Independent women do not cultivate boundaries to punish or dominate. They establish them to protect their integrity, mental health, and sense of self. Their presence is calm yet firm, deliberate yet uncompromising. This balanced assertion of self-respect contrasts sharply with the manipulative aggression of the narcissist, highlighting the difference between authentic strength and performative dominance. In essence, refusing to tolerate disrespect is a declaration of freedom. It communicates that the independent woman will not participate in the narcissist's games, will not be coerced into compliance, and will not sacrifice her dignity for the sake of preserving another's ego. It is a form of empowerment that cannot be undermined by intimidation, charm, or manipulation. The narcissist may attempt to provoke, charm, or punish, but the refusal to yield remains an impenetrable barrier. Ultimately, this refusal is a source of unassailable power. The independent woman's ability to assert boundaries, protect herself from manipulation, and maintain her integrity embodies a strength the narcissist cannot appropriate or overcome. It represents a freedom they cannot impose upon, a clarity they cannot distort, and a sense of self they cannot diminish. Her refusal to tolerate disrespect is not just defense, it is sovereignty. It is a quiet, resolute assertion that she belongs to herself, not to the whims of another's ego. And in that sovereignty, she becomes untouchable, invulnerable, and profoundly free.